a good job, because that is something that he believes and I believe is to be reformed. He's a vocal supporter of charter schools. Okay, he's a co-founder and board member of the National Political Action Committee, Democrats for Education Reform. This is something he is very, very involved with, and we all should be proud of that. In 2007, he helped create a $1 million program called REACH for rewarding achievement, funded by philanthropists to pay students in 25 public schools and 6 Roman Catholic schools in New York City who do well on advanced placement exams. So he's advocating for children in those schools to do better, and he's helped them with money. That's great. And if that wasn't enough, okay, if that wasn't enough, right, this man is also a hardcore athlete and mountaineer. He climbed the nose of El Capitan. He has summited Mount Kilimanjaro, Mount Blanc, the Matterhorn, and the Eiger. The Eiger's a tough one. You know, that was when Clint Eastwood was my hero. Anyway, he also regularly competes in obstacle course races, including the World Championships Pro Division. He's run 7 24-hour World's Toughest Mudders, winning the 50-plus age group. I didn't even know he was 50. There he is. And setting the all-time age group record of 75 miles in 2016. This is the true Renaissance man. He is who we need for the city. Everyone, please welcome our special guest, Whitney Tilson.
Thank you so much. That was one of the kindest introductions ever. I see you got the memo that flattery will get you everywhere with me. So thank you, and thank you all for showing up on and taking time out of your busy schedules. If I were to summarize my campaign very, very briefly, it's very simple. If you love this city, you're concerned that it's headed in the wrong direction, and you think the career politicians running it aren't doing a very good job, and you're looking for change, I'm the only change candidate in the race. I'm the only person who is not a career politician. I'm the only person with a business background. So I think this is the greatest city in the world. I wasn't lucky enough to be born here, so I did the next best thing. I married a New Yorker 31 years ago, and we moved down here after finishing graduate school in Boston. And we were initially planning to probably move out of the city when we had kids. And the city got safer. We fell in love with the city, and so we didn't leave the city. We stayed. We have 3 daughters now who are 28, 25, and 22 years old. They all went away to college. They have all come back and are starting their careers, and under great pressure from me, hopefully their families soon as well here. So my story, my family story, is a happy one, but it's becoming increasingly rare, because the city is heading the wrong direction at an alarming rate. So you want proof of that? The best measure, I think, of the health of any city, any state, any country would be, are people coming into that area or are they fleeing? And in New York, we have lost 707,000 people in less than 5 years. That's about 8% of our population. You might be thinking to yourself, well, there was the pandemic, and a lot of people moved out of big cities and are working remotely. And so I went and pulled the data for the top 70 cities in the United States, and our population loss, our percentage population loss, is the second highest of any US city. One other city has lost 10% of its population. Care to guess which it is? Right, San Francisco. So, why is this happening? The single biggest reason is that people just can't pay their rent. We are still a city a lot of people want to live in, yet we have made it almost impossible to build new housing here for decades, and we've created perverse disincentive for the existing housing stock. People aren't reinvesting in it, and so we're losing our existing housing stock as well. So even as our population shrinks, we still only have a 1.4% vacancy rate. And despite having the highest rents in the country, and across the country, rents are actually been going down the past few years. In New York, they're still going up. And we were already the highest. Second reason, biggest reason people are leaving is they don't feel safe. after, as John alluded to, after decades where, for example, the murder rate in this city went down by 86% as recently as 2019. It has, the murder rate and other crimes have gone in totally the other direction the last 5 years. In fact, if you look at the 7 major felonies, which would be murder, rape, robbery, felony assault, et cetera, those are up an average 52% in the past 5 years. So we have gone from one of the safest large cities in America to sort of middle of the pack at this point. I don't want to overstate it. Our violent crime rate is nowhere near some other big cities you can think of, but we've gotten a lot worse over the last 5 years than other large cities. And the last reason people are leaving this city is those who have kids are not happy with the public schools in this city, where we're spending $40 billion a year, $43,000 a kid, among the highest of any city, yet half the kids aren't even reading at a basic level. And only 75% of kids are graduating high school, and of those, half are not ready to do college-level work, despite massive spending, the highest of any state and among the highest of any city. So I don't want to be all gloom and doom here. This is an incredible city with incredible people, incredible assets. And we have a huge, huge, huge advantage, which is we're very, very, very rich. We're the richest city in the world by far. Almost 5% of US GDP is in the 5 boroughs. And we have a high tax rate. So that translates into a $114.5 billion budget this year, which is by far the highest of any city in the world. Fun trivia, number 2 is Tokyo, half our budget, twice the population. Number 3 is London, 10% greater population, 1/4 the budget of New York City. So the problem here isn't that our city government doesn't have the money. The problem is it's doing a lousy job with that enormous budget. So quick show of hands. How many of you think that the city government is delivering super high quality services commensurate with the super high taxes you're paying? Right, you sort of laugh, right? That's exactly right. So we're spending all this money, not getting great results with it. And here's the thing, of the 8.1 million New Yorkers who are left in this city, we had 8.8, we're down to 8.1. The majority of them really, really need the city government to do its job well. Their quality of life, their very life depends on it. They need the city to provide safe neighborhoods and subways, high quality schools, a decent transportation system, good housing in many cases, both directly and by making it possible to construct affordable housing. And the city's failing in doing its job, by and large. Now, I'm a hardcore lifelong Democrat, as John said. I'm the child of Peace Corps parents, spent half my childhood in Tanzania and Nicaragua. So I have impeccable left-wing credentials. I'm also a business person and a centrist with common sense and understand basic things like supply and demand and how that affects rents, for example. But I wish I could sit here and tell you that our problems, it's the Republicans' fault. But I can't. I wish I could, but we're a one-party city. We're a one-party state. It's on us. And the voters know it. Because look at what's been happening. On the last 3 elections, so look here in New York City, the last 3 elections, Donald Trump has gone from 17% to 23% to 30% of the vote here in New York City. The last, just a couple months ago, was the highest level any Republican presidential candidate has gotten in the last 36 years. Nationally, 80%, 90% of US counties swung toward Trump. And you know what? I don't think it's because they like, the average person likes Trump. His own wife doesn't like him, right? I think it's because the average person looks at blue cities and blue states that we Democrats are running and saying, if that's what you're offering, I'll hold my nose and vote the other way. So it hurts me to say it as a lifelong Democrat, but my party has become corrupt, bloated, beholden to special interests, and I'm determined to fix that. And the beauty of my candidacy is I'm running against my own party. I'm running against the party machine, against the party bosses, going straight to the voters. And that means that if I'm elected, I'm not going to owe anything to anybody, and I can spend 24/7 just fighting for all New Yorkers. So with that, let me stop my remarks. Thank you. Happy to take questions. And I do have a few slides when the inevitable question comes up about crime in the city that I think, because I know this is an audience with quite a few law enforcement folks. So I prepared some slides just for y'all.
If you want to ask a question, please go to the mic right there. I got that set up. And then
Okay, yeah, because we're webcasting or live casting this or something, so that the audience can hear the mic. Is it possible to pass it around, or people just have to go up to it? Okay.
go up to it.
Okay.
Yeah, you can get there.
Okay.
It's easy for most people. Or if you're in the front row, you can just yell it out. Go ahead. We need
Yeah.
to have some questions. If not, I'll start the questions. So Whitney,
Go ahead. Boris, right?
Yes.
Yes.
In terms of schools
Yeah.
and public schools,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts about how to improve them, and how do you make them work for most New Yorkers?
Yeah. Well, my first job out of college 35 years ago was right here in New York as employee number 2, founding Teach for America. And when I moved back to New York after business school, Wendy Kopp, the founder of Teach for America, introduced me to Dave Levin, the founder of KIPP Charter Schools. So I've been on KIPP's charter school board for 20 plus years. So I've seen charter schools are, of course, public schools, but they operate outside the bureaucracy, outside the union contract, and so we've been able to deliver radically better results for kids. And it's not just KIPP, but there are other Success, Uncommon, there are other charter networks. We have an incredible charter network here in the city. There is an artificial cap that the state has, at the behest of the teacher unions, quite frankly, has placed on expanding these schools, which I think is crazy. I think all successful schools, whatever format or governance structure they have, I don't care, should be able to expand. So I'm certainly, that's one of the many things I'm going to go to Albany to fight for. That's 15% of New York City public school kids. So we got to figure out, and charters, maybe the charter sector grows and it's 20%, but you also ask, well, what about, all the kids? The most important hire after the police superintendent is going to be the schools chancellor. I've seen what an effective mayor combined with an effective schools chancellor can do in the form of Mike Bloomberg and Joel Klein. I worked with them closely during those 12 years. Talked to anybody who knows anything who was in the system. I've talked to so many people who are in the system 35 years, and one person put it beautifully. The only time in my 35-year career where the New York City public school system was doing right by kids and putting kids first and their education first was during those 12 years. So there's a lot of different pieces of it, and I'm just bursting out of my mind. But fundamentally, it's a human resource management issue. You need high-quality teachers in every classroom, and you need to give principals the ability to control their workforce, which right now they're hamstrung by the union contract. Imagine trying to run a business and you didn't have control over who your employees are, right? So that's something that has to be negotiated in the contract, give principals more autonomy. I've got ideas where there's 70 buildings around New York, commercial buildings. They're trying to be converted to residential. They've made applications. Let's take a few of them and convert them into what they actually did in Newark called Teachers Village. And convert some of that, because keep in mind, it's very difficult to convert office buildings into residential because there's a code that says every room must have an outside window. Well, an office building, the associates, the low-level people all have inside offices. And so that's problem number one. Problem number two is by regulation, you must have a bathroom in every room. Again, office buildings don't have bathrooms in every room. I say you throw those regulations out the window and almost create sort of dormitories. These are kids coming out of college, right? So that's one of many ideas. We're having trouble attracting and retaining high-quality teachers in this city because of housing affordability issues. We've got a lot of vacant commercial real estate. So that's just one example of dozens I could give you about how to improve the quality of teachers across the city, how to attract more high quality teachers, and then retain them. Retention is a huge issue. Other questions? Go ahead. You want to use the mic?
Sure.
Yeah.
Roger Kahn.
Hey, Roger.
Talk a little bit about what would you do specifically to reduce the crime rate? And
Yeah.
how would you go about it? What kind of straight budget?
Yeah. Big picture, as you all know, in law enforcement, if you read the newspapers, you would think the crime just randomly happens everywhere. It's in fact extremely localized. If you break New York City down into 120,000 city blocks, more than half of crime occurs in 3% of those city blocks. It's very concentrated. So I would focus on those city blocks, and first and foremost is address a lot of things that are causing the crime. You can't expect police officers to be social service workers. The communities in which there's the highest crime rate have the worst schools, few after-school programs, the housing projects aren't run well, the street lights are broken, the parks are a mess, there are not appropriate mental health services for the people who need it, et cetera. So first and foremost, I want to start addressing the long-term problems and help these communities that have been the most poorly served by the city. Big idea number two is, we've got to change law enforcement, and I think it's terrible that right now we're at a 35-year low in terms of number of police officers in New York City. I do not think it is coincidental that in a period of time the serious crimes have gone up 52%, that the number of police officers have fallen from roughly 36,000 to 33,000 to a 35-year low. So I want to rebuild the police force at least back to the level it was when we were one of the safest large cities in America. I also want to stop the revolving door. I've talked to so many police officers. I just got my bike stolen 2 weeks ago. Ironically enough, in a group like this, I had my bike locked outside. And I was the victim of a crime while in a room like this talking about crime. They're sort of ironic, but that was only the last of a half dozen police officers that I spoke with, as I was reporting this crime. And to a man, and it's, I guess, mostly men I've been talking to, they have said it's become a revolving door. A lot of legislation passed, like bail reform, that has created something where basically a good idea, it captures so perfectly what I'm fighting against in my own party, which is, the saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Like a good idea got taken too far. Which is, the idea is, if someone steals a bottle of shampoo at the Duane Reade, you don't want to send them to Rikers, right? Because nobody comes out of Rikers. I was there recently, and someone said to me something very poignant, heartbreaking, which is, nobody comes out of here better than the way they came in. 75% of people who leave Rikers are back in no time, right? The recidivism rate is off the charts, so nobody's being helped there. So the last thing, you don't want to throw someone in Rikers for a low-level crime. The problem is we basically decriminalized all low-level crimes. And so the police officers are like, it's really frustrating for me when I catch somebody who's, creating mayhem, creating disorder. But they're not using a gun or a knife, right? So it can't. And I said, yeah, must be really frustrating that they're out a week later. And he laughed at me. He's like, a week? It's the same afternoon, right? Like, I'm a bleeding heart liberal, but I'm like, no, that's crazy. What's going on here? Some of this I can control as mayor. Some of this I got to go up to Albany and not repeal, but significantly reform some of the legislation that went too far. And this is what happens when you're a one-party city or one-party state, where there's no political opposition. Both parties. It happens in red states and cities too. Parties tend to get hijacked by their extremes. That's what's happened to us here, and I'm determined to drag my party back to the center. Did I see another question over here? Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Richard Stanton.
Yeah. My middle name is Richard, so.
Crazy question, which you've probably had before. What kind of incentives would you give to stimulate real estate developers to come back to the city to start developing? You can't have affordable housing built without building rental housing for a middle class that, like you mentioned before, middle class is basically out of the market.
Right.
You've got lower income incentives, and you've got condos and wealthy apartments, but
there's something going on at the super high end and the super low end. But what about the middle?
So if there has to be some incentives for the guy making $100,000 to $300,000 a year to come back to the city because they're leaving, and you have a lot of major developers that have left the city in Florida to develop, and they've sold billions of dollars worth of their properties here because of the current stabilization laws, et cetera, which really, really are hurting a lot of developers and not giving them the incentives or the tools.
Right.
keep building in the city.
You said,
We can't come back because they're the blood.
yeah. Are you in the real estate business yourself? Sounds like you're pretty, yeah.
I try.
Yeah, so you speak from experience. Yeah,
Well, I'm not a developer.
yeah.
I have patience. Yeah.
There's actually a sort of a model here, which is the city council just a little over a month ago passed something called City of Yes. And it aimed to roll back some of the, again, well-intentioned, but ideas that went way too far in zoning and other regulations. Some of them dating back to 1961, I believe. The city council passed a law basically outlawing the 6-story apartment building in New York, which was the fundamental basic building block of middle-class housing for New York for a century. And they just, I don't know, they outlawed it. And then it's built up from there. I've talked to real estate developers who are like, under Bloomberg, it took us, 6 months to get through the permitting process and break ground, and now it's 2 years, right? I've talked to developers who develop in other cities, and the developer here is like, yeah, the church gave us a building. We're going to tear it down and build in a high-density neighborhood that really needs new housing. We're going to build new housing. I said, great. When do you break ground? They're like, we're stalled for 2 years for the environmental review. I was like, what are you talking about? What do you mean 2 years? So I asked the developer, well, how long is that like in Nashville or something, other places he develops? And he says, 2 weeks. Right? So good ideas taken to extremes are bad ideas. So the City of Yes attacked some of these things, but by the time the NIMBY folks and the far left got through with it, where it barely passed the city council, it was all watered down. So it's a step in the right direction, but a baby step. I'm going to go in and fight, it's 10%. I'm going to go in and fight for the remaining 90%. City of Yes is supposed to deliver 80,000 new units in 15 years in a city of 8.1 million people. Does that sound to you like it's going to really ease our housing crisis? So, I want to be thinking numbers of 500,000, a million new units. And, to give you a sense, to lean into your question, 2/3 of New Yorkers are working class and 3% of the construction is working class housing. Right? Well, basic supply and demand, again, explains, why rents are going up across the board and why New Yorkers are being forced out of the city.
We don't have, every other state has workforce housing.
Sure.
It's the hottest
Sure.
thing in the country right now. A lot of it's in
Sure.
opportunity zones. We don't have it.
Right. I mean, look, I think, in a housing crisis like we have now, every one of those commercial office buildings should get a waiver from the outside window and the bathroom in every unit. And there are plenty of people in New York who, for an affordable rent, will live without a window or a shared bathroom on a hallway, particularly young people who are coming out of college dorms, right? And I think you subsidize that for teachers as a starting point, for example. Sure.
Can you help us understand over the last 24 years how we got to this point? So I moved to New York in 2002 from Los Angeles.
Right.
So late Giuliani, a member of Bloomberg, a member Anthony Weiner, who gave us de Blasio, and where we are today. So help us understand why are we having this conversation?
Yeah. Are you asking broadly speaking or crime specifically?
Quality of life.
Yeah. Yeah. Would you mind throwing up some slides? Just because I made some slides. I want to show them to you. Because I'll at least show you some of the data, right, on crime and what's happening. And then, I was in the room last month where Mayor Adams said to a room full of 200 CEOs, this is the safest, I guess I should use the microphone, right?
Take it with you.
Oh, okay. This is the safest large city in America. And I was like, no, it's not. Never was, but we were close. We were, as I'll show you. But New Yorkers don't agree. So who's right? Because it's possible, they just read terrible headlines and that gives them a false perception, right? So next slide. So here are the numbers. Come on, reload. It's coming slowly. So I'll explain what we're about to see here. So here are the 7 major felonies I was talking about, and you can't hold Mayor Adams responsible for 5 years. He's only been mayor for 3 years. So I just took the last 3-year numbers, and what you will see over here is there's one number, and it's very good news. The murder rate is down 20% in the last 3 years. It spiked 53% in the first 2 years of COVID, in part because of COVID, but other large cities were up 15%, and we're up 53%, right? So I think part of that was some of this criminal justice reform legislation, like bail reform, that went too far. and left dangerous people who should not have been out on our streets. So the murder rate has pulled back from up 53 to down 20, so we're still up 28% from 5 years ago. But even just the last 3 years, all of the other major serious crimes, rape, robbery, felony, assault, burglary, are up substantially, double digits in most cases. Next slide. So the data confirms the city's become a lot less safe in the last 5 years. Next slide. So this is the population slide I was showing you. So there's San Francisco, there's New York. They're actually slightly more from their peak in April of 2020. So, but that's from the peak. San Francisco is down 10 and 8. And you can look, we're like alone, are these two cities in losing population. Next slide. So here's your question about, long term. You said you came in 92?
2002.
2002. All right, well, good. That's where this data starts. And you can see these are the 7 major felonies down, and then just sort of, you can see the direction of the lines is up. Next slide. So let's take a look at the murder rate. And the good news, here's the 86% decline in murders that I talked about earlier from the peak. And this doesn't really look like much of a bump, but from a low base, that's 50-odd%, and we're still up 20% on murders. Next slide. But then if you look closer over the last 10 years on rape, up 20% last year, felony assault rate up 55%, robberies up 35%, and then murders I've talked about. So next slide. So what's interesting is you're like, okay, well, the last 5 years there was a pandemic, so maybe other large cities had big increase in crime. So I went and pulled the data for 37 other cities that have more than 500,000 people in the United States, and I said, what is the ranking of New York? So we were 5th best in our murder rate, 2nd best rape, robbery, felony, assault, and the red bars is what's happened over the last 5 years. So the answer is no, other large cities did not experience anything close to the big increase in crime. So next slide, and I think, so here just, these are seven other felony offenses. Again, you can just see trends down. And then, just general, other felonies, felony criminal mischief, other felonies are at a 25-year high. Dangerous drug felonies, after huge declines, spiked 43% in 2003. We don't yet have the 2024 data for this. Next slide. And here are misdemeanors. And again, downward trend, up. Assaults, misdemeanor assaults are up. Felony assaults are at a 25-year high. And here's petty larceny. This is the revolving door of people, why everything's behind plexiglass in your drugstores at pretty much at or close to a 25-year high. So let me see, is there one more slide here? Is that the last one? Oh, it's not just affecting civilians. Injuries to police officers on duty are up 47%. There was a decline in 2020 because there were just fewer people out on the streets and so forth. But even excluding that decline, just from pre-COVID to the latest data, 3rd quarter of 2024. I think that's the last slide. So you can just put the main slide back up. So to your question is like, what happened? Why did this happen? I think why that you break it in 2 pieces. Why did we see such a great decline, and then why has it reversed? You break it into those 2 categories. Why did it decline? I think there are a number of factors, but I think better policing, enforcing, what you call broken windows style of policing, and there was a drug epidemic that hit the city that crested and went down that I think helped. So there are a lot of theories behind that, but I think more effective policing was a significant part of it. And if you want to reduce criminal activities, having certain and relatively quick consequences a judicial system that functions reasonably well and doesn't create a revolving door and takes people who are out there creating mayhem off the streets. Like there needs to be, it's not just cops, of course. So I think that was part of it. And look, New York, had an economically has had a big boom, Wall Street and so forth. So there were a lot of factors contributing to it. I've already talked about some of the things that went wrong. Obviously, the pandemic contributed to it, but I think the leadership in this city. Under these career politicians. It is not normal to have 4 police commissioners in the first 3 years of your term, which is what has happened under the current mayor. And I think I can point to 8 pieces of legislation that collectively were meant to move the pendulum from here to here and instead moved it to here. That collectively has reduced consequences for criminal behavior, and I think that's been a big contributor as well. Other questions? Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So 2 questions. You had mentioned the size of the budget and the inefficiency of spend. I'm curious what areas you've identified as the most inefficient and what you could do to rectify it. And then my actual question, before you mentioned that, was why is homelessness so pronounced in the city?
Yeah.
What are the causes, and what would you do to address it?
Yeah. So the answer to the first question is, honestly, nobody really knows for sure. Because I ask everybody, like, how are we spending so much money and getting so much going in and so little coming out, right? And it's sort of a black box. And I say, well, can you at least break it down for me? How much of it is just total corruption and people like stealing the money and make work jobs, et cetera, versus how much of it is just inefficiency? I mean, you could argue how much of it is when you have your political leaders effectively elected by the people they're negotiating with, most notably the public sector unions. Imagine what that negotiation looks like when that politician was effectively elected by the very people and owes their political, not only their current political job, but any future political job. One of the reasons I think I can come in is someone who will not be beholden and we'll have real negotiations. And I'm a Democrat. Like, I'm pro-labor, and I intend to go out there and make my pitch to unions around the city. And I'm not going to have much luck with the teacher unions, frankly, given my 35-year history of fighting for kids. But I would like to think the police officers, the captains union and the officers union, I could make a pretty good pitch to. And by the way, it's ranked choice voting, so I can ask people to say, at least put me on the ballot, rank me, one of your top 2 or 3. So where is the fat? Where can we? How much savings are there, and where are they? The answer is I think the single biggest pot is going to be in the DOE budget, because I know the most people there, and they tell me the most stories, and it's by far the biggest. For example, our fire department budget is $2.2 billion. Our DOE budget, Department of Education, is $40 billion of our $114 billion. So that's the biggest pool of money, and that's, I think, where both the most corruption and the most inefficiency is. But the reality is, because nobody knows, my second most important job is to set the broad policy priorities and agenda. My second most important job is to hire the 155 people that the mayor gets to appoint in this strong mayoral system we have in New York. And my goal is to hire 155 people, all smarter than I am in their particular area, and I'm going to defer to them. I'm a business person. I'm a manager. I know bad management when I see it, and I also know the principles of good management, which is hire great people and then let them do their job. And don't think you're the smartest guy in the room. Listen to them. And so my mandate to everyone I hire will be twofold. Number one, run it better. Fight crime better, have better streets, better parks, better hospital system, better mental health services, something we need. And number two is find me the fat, because this Doge idea of Elon Musk parachuting in from the outside into some of the world's largest bureaucracies and thinking that you can distinguish between fat and muscle, and, right? You can't do that from the outside. The reality is you need experts in that area who know where the bodies are buried, where the corruption is occurring. And so my second thing is find me the fat, but don't, improve services. But you got to deliver me at least $10 billion out of this $114 billion budget that I can then reinvest in things like the Teachers Village I mentioned earlier, but you asked a second question about homelessness. It feels like an enormous, impossible problem, but it actually isn't. 90% of New York City's homeless have a roof over their head tonight. For perspective, Los Angeles, only 30%. We have an enormous shelter system of drop-in units, et cetera. It does not operate very well. The shelters, many of the shelters are dangerous, and people are choosing to be out on the streets rather than being in a shelter. That's how bad some of them are. But it's a very large system, and 90% of people are in it. So the remaining problem that we see is a little over 4,000 people on the streets at night. And I'll give you a preview of a press conference I'm doing on Tuesday. But the City Council passed a law, the Homelessness Bill of Rights, 2 years ago. And I actually agree with almost all the elements of it, except the 5 words. I forget the exact 5 words, but it basically says the right to sleep outside is enshrined in this law. And I was like, no, there is. I don't think it's okay. I don't think it's normal. I don't think it's acceptable that anyone is sleeping in our public places at night. And in fact, no one's sleeping in our public parks overnight. You can't sleep in Central Park. Try it. So I'm like, well, if it's not okay in our public parks, why is it okay in our public subways or on our public streets? So the first thing I will be accused of course, in saying this, and I think we should reverse that law and say exactly the opposite, that nobody is allowed to sleep on our streets or subways or parks in any public space in New York. It's incredibly dangerous for them. On nights like tonight, people will freeze to death, right? And these are people, many of them are mentally ill or suffering from addiction and aren't able to take care of themselves. But it's also severely impacts quality of life for all of us. So in outlawing homelessness, I will be accused of, not outlawing homelessness, outlawing being on the street overnight. I will be accused of criminalizing homelessness. And my attitude is no, it's exactly the opposite. We need to help these people, they need help. And the good news is we've got 90% of the problem solved. We need to expand the existing system by about 10% to take another 4,000 people. And that is doable, and it involves the first night, there are things called drop-in centers, then people, if they need shelter for more than one night, there are shelters, but then you've got a longer-term problem, and in fact, we're building very little housing that we have to solve as well. Here's another little crazy statistic I just learned yesterday. In the 1950s, there were almost 100,000 people in New York State institutionalized in mental institutions. People who can't take care of themselves and who we have to take care of really for the rest of their lives. Today it's 3,500, almost 100,000 to 3,500. So I've been looking into this and I was like, well, what did you do with 95% of them? And the real answer behind the scenes is at many of these institutions, when they closed them down, they gave them a bus ticket to the Port Authority. That's what they did with them. And these are people now suffering on our streets. You know, this has been happening slowly over decades. Most recently, Cuomo, 10 years ago, passed a law taking out another 20% of the beds. And so some of these people need sort of short-term help, but some of these people are gonna need long-term help, and I'm gonna call out the state and say, you've gone way too far in this. So, other questions?
Do one last question.
Okay, sure.
I mean, if nobody's going to ask.
Go ahead.
I promised my girlfriend I wouldn't ask any questions. I'm going to ask one. I love the social compassion.
Yeah.
As a native New Yorker, I don't feel myself a Democrat anymore, but I really appreciate you.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
Public sector labor unions.
Yes.
Do you believe that they should exist? Sanctuary city.
Yeah.
Do you believe that we should be one?
Yeah.
We're the capital of America. How would you work with the President of the United States if you're elected?
Give me the first one again, because I was already focusing on the second two. Public sector unions. Oh, yeah, yeah. And sanctuary city, and how do we? Yeah, yes. So public sector unions, I understand the argument for why there's an inherent structural reason that they shouldn't exist, which is, for example, in New York, I really don't think we're a democracy here. Last election, Mayor Adams won the election by winning the primary with 5% of New York City's voters. We elected a mayor with 5% of New York City's voters. He won in the 8th round of ranked choice voting with 400,000 votes in a city of what was then 8.8 million people. So how is this possible? And the answer is the Democratic Party machine has rigged the system to make it very difficult for any outsider, anyone like me, to run. They've scheduled the election in an off year, the primary in the middle of the summer, and it's a closed primary, meaning only registered Democrats can vote. Independents all can't vote for me. So it's deliberate voter suppression, and it works. Last election, only 26% of eligible Democrats voted, and if you think that's a terrible low number, it was 14.5% the previous election. So a handful of special interest groups and public sector unions can turn out in a low turnout election, effectively elect their own mayor. So actually, I would say that the root of our problems, of our dysfunctional, the elected officials and all, is sort of structural. Like, I think many of them are hardworking people trying to do the right thing, but the reality of their existence and the reality of our system, which isn't democratic. So I don't, I understand the argument, but I'm a pragmatist. I'm not going to spend any time, I can't be Scott Walker like in Wisconsin and go in and bust the unions. That's not who I am, and it wouldn't work. So I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it, though I understand why you're asking. Number 2, sanctuary city. I have no interest in cooperating with the Trump administration and trying to deport 12 million people. I think it would be impossibly expensive, tremendously immoral, would crash our economy and spike our inflation through the roof. And I'm the descendant of immigrants myself. Where we went too far was the city council. And by the way, we've been a sanctuary city going back to 1979. And what it means is someone who is undocumented and someone who's here illegally. There are about 500,000 people here illegally, as opposed to the 230,000 odd migrant asylum seekers who are technically here legally and came suddenly. That's a separate group from the 500,000. But one of those people here undocumented, they gave birth to a child who is a U.S. citizen, and they take them to school. They shouldn't be afraid that they're going to get reported and deported for bringing their child to school. If they are injured and they go to a hospital, that people wouldn't go to hospitals. People wouldn't report crimes if they thought that any contact with any city authorities could result in their deportation. So the original sanctuary city legislation dating back to 1979, I strongly support. What went wrong is the city council in 2014, particularly 2018, passed enhanced sanctuary city legislation that's basically precluded cooperation between any city officials and any federal officials, even for people on the terrorist watch list, wanted for murder in other countries, or who are committing mayhem in this country. As a result of this, we shut down the ICE office on Rikers. My general view is I'm not talking about broken taillights, but someone who's part of like the infamous case a month or two ago where the Venezuelan gang member assaulted one of Bragg's ADAs at 2 in the morning. It turns out it was his 7th arrest last year. I break strongly with most of my Democratic Party in thinking that guy on the first arrest should have been handed over to ICE. It costs more than $500,000 a year for us to hold someone at Rikers anyway, right? I don't want that expense. I don't want that person in my city. Hand them to ICE and don't let the door hit you on the way out. And my view on that is anyone who's not a U.S. citizen is a privilege to be here. And if you're a Swiss banker committing fraud and you're busted for that, don't let the door hit you on the way back to Switzerland. Your third question was generally how to cooperate with the Trump administration. The answer is that I'll do it with my head, not my heart, because I have grave concerns about that man and a lot of the things he's doing. But that said, my job is to represent the people of New York City, and the federal government is really, really important for a lot of things. I just talked about, an area I will cooperate in terms of getting dangerous people out of our city who are committing mayhem and threatening all of us. But look, we need a lot of federal money for our transportation, for our housing, et cetera. And, I'll do my best to fight for New York and make sure we get as many federal dollars into our city as possible. So I'll be a pragmatist, I guess.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
All right, thanks. Let me just wrap up. So Whitney's got to go, but before he goes, I want to make sure, remember, if you heard some things that are good, and I heard a lot of good things, I don't agree with everything. You don't need to. Okay, you got to know the character of a person. And Whitney's been doing this, the good work, his whole life. Just look at it, and that's what matters. So he's not doing this for virtue signaling. He's not doing this for any kind of personal glory. He's doing it because he believes in New York City, and he believes somebody could do the job. So I want to thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you.
Okay.
To echo your pitch, if anyone would like to support my campaign, one of I love doing what I'm doing and learning and meeting people and fighting the good fight for things I believe in. The worst part of this job is raising money, and I hate to be a beggar, but that is what I signed up for. So as you mentioned earlier, the 8-to-1 city match, I assume probably most of your city residents, it's pretty exceptional. Any donation you make from $10 up to $250 gets matched 8-to-1. So $250 turns into $2,250 for my campaign. You just go to whitneyformayor.com or scan this QR code or take any of the pamphlets that we have like this that are out there. And I would appreciate your support. Thank you.
Thanks, Whitney. Good luck on the next little journey you're going to. We'll see you again. Whitney will be back probably more because we need to keep talking about this. Don't just hear it tonight and go home and do nothing. You have to support him. You have to be a participant. And you have to vote.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.
All right.
Thanks, Whitney.